On the 17th anniversary of the North-South Joint Declaration, the new president of South Korea, Moon Jae-In, said that he is willing to hold talks with the DPRK unconditionally if Pyongyang stops testing nuclear missiles. So far, official statements from the DPRK bode well for Seoul's initiative. Will Pyongyang eventually accept this offer? Can the new South Korean president ease tensions in the peninsula? Moon Jae-in made a campaign promise to rediscuss the counter-deployment of THAAD, which triggered tensions with South Korea's biggest neighbor. THAAD's operation has been suspended due to a lack of environmental assessment. What's South Korea's new policy on THAAD? Will Seoul eventually withdraw THAAD? Better relations between Washington and Pyongyang is the key to de-escalating tensions over the DPRK's nuclear program. Pyongyang has released U.S. student Otto Warmbier, who came home in a coma. Will this worsen relations between the U.S. and the DPRK? What's the reaction of the United States? The Trump administration has praised China for its role in easing tensions in the Korean Peninsula. China has become the main force in mediating contending parties. What's China's next move in denuclearizing the peninsula?
US diplomatic efforts, which started in talks in Norway, eventually led to the release of an American university student detained by the DPRK. Meanwhile, in Seoul, President Moon Jae-in said he would negotiate with Pyongyang unconditionally if it ceased nuclear and missile tests, though it remained to be seen if this gesture of good dampened the DPRK's determination to build nuclear weapons. President Moon will also visit the United States on June the 28th to discuss the THAAD anti-missile system and the alliance between the US and ROK. Facing a complex and sensitive Korean Peninsula situation, China is carefully dealing with the DPRK's continuing nuclear program, THAAD deployment in South Korea, and US military presence nearby. To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Teng Jianqun from the China Institute of International Studies and Mr. Rick Duham, a visiting scholar of Tsinghua University. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pan Deng. So, gentlemen, I'd like to start with South Korean President Moon Jae-in's words. He said he's willing to unconditionally negotiate with the DPRK if the DPRK stops its nuclear and ballistic missile tests. That sounds a preconditioned offer to the DPRK. Do you think the DPRK will listen?
No, I don't think at this moment the DPRK leaders, especially the leader Teng Jianqun, will give any compromise in suspension of the nuclear and the missile test, because this is a determined policy or strategy to go nuclear armed in that country. And Moon Jae-in actually gave some conditions. For example, the stop of the activities in nuclear and missiles. This is not unconditional negotiation with DPRK. So I think the two sides should think about their way ahead and give no condition, no condition, in the negotiation or the contact between the two sides.
Right, Mr. Dunn, what's your take on this? The DPRK knows that its repeated nuclear and ballistic missile tests will provoke stronger and tougher US reactions. But why did keep doing so?
Well, because they want to build the nuclear program. I mean, I think that this...
At the cost of most of their national interest?
Exactly. I mean, it is counterproductive diplomatically, counterproductive economically, but the Kim dynasty, I think, believes firmly that only with nuclear weapons will they be taken seriously in the world. Can they defend themselves and project their power? I mean, I think right now we're in a situation where the new leader of South Korea has to get on the same page with the President of the United States and the President of China. I think it's important right now that those three countries come up with a unified strategy for going forward. If they are going to negotiate without any preconditions, fine, they should all agree on that. Or if they say we are going to negotiate only if North Korea halts the nuclear program, at least temporarily.
Yes, we'll be talking about related parties' efforts in a while, but now let's focus on internal relations on the Korean Peninsula. And this year marks the 17th anniversary of the June 15th North-South Joint Declaration. It's still, that means a good window could be opened for inter-Korea negotiations. Do you think the possibility is big there?
It's very hard for the two countries to resume the momentum, as did 17 years ago. And I think the joint declaration just gave the guideline, and they gave the roadmap to cooperate, to have a division of labor in finding peaceful solutions in the Korean Peninsula. So I think at this moment, because the situation has been changed greatly, for example, the DPRK has already got the nuclear bomb and they did several rounds of missile tests. This is actually a great challenge for the countries in this region, and we should have new vision toward the situation in Korean Peninsula. But I think such a joint declaration is, of course, of some implication for current situation, and for DPRK and ROK to think about the background at that time. The president of ROK, Kim Jong-un, and DPRK leader Kim Il-sung just reached such a great consensus to go ahead together, but suddenly stopped by the so-called nuclear issue in DPRK. Why? Some country at that time did not like the two Koreans and closer.
Which country are you talking about?
Maybe the United States and some other countries in this region, because the unification between the two Koreans might give some big changes in the geopolitical arena.
Mr. Dunham, do you think the United States is unwilling to see a united Korean Peninsula?
No, I don't. And I think particularly President Obama would have been willing to figure out a way to have a neutral Korea without U.S. troops on the Chinese border. But right now, it's a dream. I mean, right now, we can all see that happening as the end game, but we can't figure out how we get from today to there. I mean, you have so many questions of economic instability, political instability, refugees that you would have to deal with, and how you would combine the two Koreas. I mean, I see it coming, just like I saw a unified Germany, but I don't see it like the Berlin Wall just coming down and a peaceful reunification. I think it's going to be a lot harder in Korea.
So what do you think President Donald Trump's DPRK policy? Is there a DPRK policy?
Well, that's always a good question with Donald Trump. Right now, there is not a coherent and a cohesive Korean policy. It's sort of ad hoc. He has both praised China for wanting to have a solution, but then saying, what's been going on is not acceptable, and if China doesn't take care of it, I'll take care of it myself. The Secretary of State of the United States went to South Korea and ended up insulting the South Korean leadership, I mean, by a simple thing of not going to dinner with them, but he said one thing, and in Washington, Donald Trump tweeted the exact opposite. So right now, the problem is the world as a whole doesn't know what the Trump administration position is, and particularly the two Koreas don't know what the Trump position is.
What's your take, Mr. Tang? Do you think there's a strategic limbo currently regarding the Korean Peninsula issue?
I think the Donald Trump's policy at this moment, if we look at the evolution from the very beginning, during the campaign, Donald Trump took the issue might be very easy. He even said DPRK nuclear issue easy. We can invite Kim Jong-un to have a hamburger and to have a phone call so we can solve the DPRK nuclear issue. But now, especially from early February this year, actually the Donald Trump administration has greatly changed his attitude toward Kim Jong-un and DPRK, which the administration would like to use force, to use sanction against DPRK to give some compromise in nuclear and in missile development. This is actually a new change of U.S. policy toward DPRK. You know, so many advanced military equipment for the aircraft carrier, bombers, and special operational forces, you know, deployed there. So this is actually a military, you know, implication for the new situation, and also, you know, several rounds of sanctions, not only from UN Security Council but also from, you know, some individual countries.
So what about the implications from two latest developments? One is that the DPRK has just released an American university student but who's in coma, and U.S. basketball star Dennis Rodman is now visiting the DPRK. Do you think the two issues are somehow linked?
Yeah, to my understanding, this is a very strong signal from Teng Jianqun that he's willing to have any contact, not only with his counterpart from the United States, but also from ROK. Actually, President Moon Jae-In, you know, in the past 1 month, he gave some new, you know, policies toward DPRK, quite different from the previous government, from Park Geun-hye. Actually, this might be a strong political signal to the outside world that he's willing, or he's waiting for the positive policies taken by ROK and by the United States.
Yes, Mr. Dunham, what do you make of these two latest developments?
Well, I think that it's the Dennis Rodman trip to North Korea at this time is very interesting. He knows Trump. I mean, they were both celebrities, but to me, the little signal that I saw was that he brought with him a book, The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. If that's not a signal, I'm not sure what there is. It's just that.
Do you think he's actually carrying some message for the
that
US
may have been the message. I mean, I think the answer is yes. It may not be directly, but I think that without knowing this positively, I would think that he has been briefed, and that I think the United States. I mean, Trump has almost a schizophrenic policy. He's been threatening force, but he's offering an opportunity, and I mean, I hope for the sake of the Koreas that Kim Jong-un takes the opportunity to open a dialogue. One thing he's wanted and has not gotten since he has been the leader is one-on-one conversations with the United States. I mean, he never got that during the Obama years. And I think if he takes this opportunity, there's a chance of conversations with the Trump administration, either directly or indirectly.
What about just the released American university
Well, I think
students?
in some ways that was.
There?
I think that was a precondition that you. I think that American intelligence students conditioned and felt that they couldn't go forward with any kind of initiative to North Korea as long as he was being held. I mean, it's a very sad situation, and it could inflame relations. But so far, the Trump White House has not gone on the offensive about it. So that makes me believe that it is all interconnected, and that they are trying to talk to North Korea right now.
Right, gentlemen, we'll continue this discussion in a short while. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. So, gentlemen, let's move on to this very sensitive and thorny issue of the deployment of the US THAAD anti-missile system. Do you think President Moon Jae-In will actually stop its deployment?
No, I don't think so.
It's just a temporary?
It's a temporary decision by the ROK president, because he has no such room to move forward to cancel the deployment of the U.S. program in ROK. You know, actually, Moon Jae-in's attitude toward the deployment of THAAD has been changed. If we look at Beijing, actually, he was opposing such a deployment, but when he was elected as the president of ROK, he changed his policy, and he said he's willing to see the deployment of THAAD in ROK, and he would like to use some leverage or bargaining chip with countries like the United States. He said this is not a legal process, decision by the Defense Ministry of ROK and by Park Geun-hye's administration. And he would like to ask the Parliament or the Congress of ROK to have a legal assessment whether it is legal to accept such a deployment, and also he would like to have investigation on the 4 launching vehicles, which without noticement to the president. So he would like to use some leverage to bargain with some other countries and show his sincerity in dealing with such a thorny challenge between China, ROK, between ROK and the United States. So this is actually a very serious situation, or actually it's a dilemma for the current ROK president.
So do you think, Mr. Duham, do you think this issue will come up as a major item during President Moon Jae-in's visit to the United States on June the 28th?
Oh, absolutely, and I think that was intentional by President Moon. What he's done is slowed down the process, and he's gained at least some control, some leverage over the final decision. I think he'll have an opportunity to talk to Donald Trump, but he also will have an opportunity to talk to Secretary of Defense Mattis, and I think get some idea of the defense reasoning for this. But it is so sensitive, and right now, moving ahead with it still will make it very difficult to cooperate for China to cooperate with the Republic of Korea, and so. Yes, he needs to talk to Trump about it. Yes, he needs some leverage in negotiations, but I don't see him stopping it right now. I don't know what it would take for him to go back to his campaign position.
So, Mr. Teng, what would be some other major items on President Moon's agenda during his visit to the U.S.?
Of course, trade and economic cooperation between the two countries. For example, the buying of new advanced weapon systems from the United States. I'm sure Donald Trump would like to see ROK willing to pay much more for the
US
deployment, not only weapon system, but also the deployment of U.S. troops in ROK. So this is actually a bargaining visit for President Moon Jae-in with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is everywhere, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar. He would like to have some business with these countries.
So back to the inter-Korean relations issue, how much influence will the U.S. impose on South Korea to deal with the DPRK this time?
Actually,
because many are wondering that if President Moon Jae-in adopt a kind of sunshine policy, just like his political mentor Rodman did.
But I don't think the United States are willing to have such a condition for ROK President Moon Jae-in to restore the so-called sunshine policy toward the DPRK. This is a new environment for the countries concerned. And I think the best choice for ROK president is to maintain a so-called balanced relation with major powers, with some other countries in this region. Actually, he has been trying to do so. For example, he made some phone call with Chinese leader, with Russian leader, with U.S. leader, and he also sent some special envoys to these countries to talk about the cooperation, to talk about the challenges they are facing now. So we have such a new president at this moment. We should have a new vision toward Moon Jae-in's policy in this region.
So do you think, talking about DPRK nuclear issue, do you think there will be a resumption of the SixParty Talks?
No, I don't think at this moment. Actually, two important factors I'd like to mention here. The first is the DPRK leader, because they haven't yet finished their program. They would like to continue the
You
development.
mean the nuclear program?
Yeah, the nuclear and the missile.
What's the end of this program?
At least they can have a mature capability, both in nuclear and in missile. And the second is the U.S. I don't think Donald Trump has already set up his mind to have a negotiation directly with the leaders of DPRK. Yeah, there were some contacts between the two, between ROK and the United States, in the past year, in past month. But I think these will only second track, not official to official, and that's not represent the policy from Donald Trump's administration.
So, Mr. Duham, do you think when time comes, the United States is more willing to talk to the DPRK directly?
I think so. I think that Donald Trump sees himself as a very strong man, and I think that he is confident enough that he could do that. But I also think it's a volatile situation. We could have great progress, or we could have war. I mean, and with Trump's personality, you don't know which way it's going to go. But I think there's great opportunity at the same time. There's great peril to move forward. I don't think it's going to be in the old six-party talks. I think it would have to be between those two countries. And so much is changing so quickly. You have South Korea is distancing itself just a little from the U.S. and from Japan, talking about renegotiating the agreement on the sex slaves during the war. So South Korea is trying to position itself at the same time as not being completely dependent on those two countries.
So what do you view China's role in all this situation so far?
Well, I think it is to keep pressure on the North and to do whatever can be done to halt the program. I mean, nothing has worked so far. There's not much else that China can do. I mean, China is not going to respond militarily. I mean, the U.S. can threaten, China will never threaten. So I think it's really diplomatic and economic pressure is what can happen, and to facilitate in any way back-channel talks if the United States wants to talk to North Korea.
Well, Mr. Teng, it looks like President Trump is trying to have China share more responsibilities in dealing with the DPRK from his words. Do you think China would actually willing to do that?
Actually, China's position toward DPRK nuclear has been there for many years. For example, China has three principles. First is denuclearization. Second is the stability of the region. And third, we should find the solution by dialogue and negotiation. So I think China's policy has not been yet changed, and China is willing to contribute greatly in finding the peaceful solution in Korean Peninsula. And there has been long debate in China whether China should be more active, not only to be a mediator, but also to be a player in this game. So I think China's leaders, to some extent, have already changed a little bit, toward the DPRK nucleus. If we look at the recent proposal by our Foreign Minister Wang Yi, you can say the dual track and the two suspension. I think these are new proposals from the Chinese government. China actually is playing a very important role this time in the game.
Right, but on another key issue, the deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system, China's opposition has been very clear and consistent. Do you think China will keep opposing the deployment of this? What if South Korea and the United States keep doing so?
I think China's response will be interpreted from at least two aspects. The first is the diplomatic. Chinese diplomats will continue their criticism towards such a deployment, and of course our military preparation. For them, our counter anti-missile system, we are going to deploy in some areas very close to the position of the US THAAD system in ROK. So we have two preparation at this time for the country to deal with such a challenge or threat.
Well, Mr. Dunn, why do you think the United States want to deploy the THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea in such an urgent manner, besides all those legal and procedural issues mentioned by Mr. Hun earlier? What about timing? Timing is very curious. It was actually deployed during this political turmoil period in Korea.
Exactly. I know this is one where you have to separate the political from the military. The political timing is curious. The military reason to have a missile defense system to protect South Korea, to protect Japan, makes sense. That you want to have something. That you you have a leader of North Korea who's firing off missiles into the Sea of Japan. You want to have some way to defend, but it is just so complicated diplomatically, and I don't know if the United States is going to pay any more attention to what China is saying about THAAD than North Korea is saying, is paying attention to what China is saying about building its missiles.
Well, besides all of that, THAAD is a very expensive military hardware system. Do you think United States or the US politicians are trying to appeal to the military-industrial complex and set it as a brand, because now Japan wants to purchase it, and there are possibilities of deploying this system in Eastern Europe?
The short answer is yes, whether you call it the military-industrial complex or the American economy. I mean, I do think that some people in the U.S. administration see it as a big benefit for the U.S. economy, and yes, this is the sample. This is the test run, and if it's successful there, yes, Eastern Europe, anywhere near the Russian border, Japan obviously would be a possible customer. So yes, that's why I say this is complicated politically, it's complicated economically, diplomatically, and the bottom line is it's a military system, so it complicates the military situation.
Right, Mr. Teng, you just said that THAAD is not going to go from South Korea. So how would that affect future China-South Korean ties?
I'm sure this is a very serious challenge for the two countries to have a good understanding toward each other, especially when ROK accept the deployment of US THAAD in that country, because it not only deteriorates the two countries' relation, but also deteriorate the stability. I mean, the strategic ability among major powers will hurt the strategic deterrence capability of China and, of course, and Russia. Deterrent capability of that country. So this is not only a military system, this is actually a political program by the United States. Actually, after the acceptance of ROK to deploy such a system, the relations between China and ROK has been deteriorated just because of such a deployment. So I think this is not only a military system, this is actually a political program for the United States.
Well, Mr. Duham, do you think the US pressure, both military and political pressure on the DPRK, has reached a certain limit for the time being?
I think the political pressure has reached a limit. What more can you do than what the United States has said? Right now, it's a question of, is Donald Trump bluffing, or is there a military response? I would say if Donald Trump is president going ahead, that you have to look at the potential of a military response, and then we all have to think of contingency plans if we have military conflict on the Korean Peninsula.
Right, let's wish peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula for the two countries there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for insight. And that's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Pandong in Beijing. Bye-bye.